Alright, in this video, I'm going to talk through every single weapon in the game, because fuck it. Am I even allowed to say that on YouTube anymore? Fuck it. Alright, books. We're not going to talk about books. We're not going to talk about offense. Curse. I'm mainly going to be talking about the ZvZ weapons, but I will probably end up talking about some of the other weapons as well. Probably for the fact of why they aren't ZvZ weapons. Keep in mind, the intro to ZvZ weapons, the things we're looking for are 30-second cooldowns, hit clumps of enemies for maximum amount of damage, and hit quick. Alright? One-handed curse. This is a single target thing that blows up. We don't care about that. Shadow Caller. This, Shadow Caller is the more recently added weapon. The leather thing, completely irrelevant. The cloth one it does damage in a small area, but it's over time, and it's just not enough fast enough. The pierce is pretty big, but we could just use Damnation, which is another curse weapon, and get a wider area. Life Curse, Spinny Blades, reduces damage dealt by enemies. We have Guardian Armor for that, and it doesn't do damage. Great Curse, it stacks up your dots. We don't care about dots. We're trying to kill people. Damnation, giant AoE pierce. Mwah. Beautiful. This is like our go-to curse weapon in ZvZ, but I guess keep in mind it doesn't do a lot of damage. It's mostly there for the pierce. This thing used to be broken. It used to be like, I think Take Care like popularized the like Damnation bomb squads, and you'd run in with 10 people because this thing hits like your entire screen. It's huge. And they just run in there, and 10 people would pop it off, and everyone would die, and it was frankly hilarious, but it was also stupid. But that's a tangent. Yeah, so this is it's really more of like a support weapon because you're there for the AOE pierce. But it does have a cast time, so you're going to be wearing cloth because you need the scholar robe. Demonic Staff. This is your if you were going to bring healing reduction to a ZvZ, you would bring this thing. It's a decent radius, and 60% healing reduction, but my opinion, no go on the healing reduction in ZvZs. Just fucking kill people. Alright, Cursed Skull is our second sort of ZvZ option. It's got a decent radius, it moves a little bit. Main thing being that it does percent max health true damage. Which sounds better than it is, really. It's currently not that great if you're trying to... And it's also damage over time. Not really that great, but it is an okay amount of damage. I think it's getting buffed next patch as of this video, so maybe then it'll be kind of worth using, but it's definitely not like it's a use in combination with other people, and if you have enough people hitting it, then or if you have someone that just only has curse spec, then it is what it is. Other big thing about curse is the armor piercer W. This thing also reduces resistances. It's in a line, which is not as great, but if people are clumped together well enough, then you're fine. Alright, Frost. One-handed Frost. This is a ganking weapon. It doesn't really do damage, it reaps people. Chill. This is a single target freeze. This is a, I don't know, 1v1 weapon or something. I don't know. Yeah, I think that's just because using Corrupteds. That's the only place I've ever seen it really used. Maybe in like HCEs or something. It's not good in a ZvZ. Hoarfrost. Shoots a snowball that goes over and stuns people and does some damage. Um, this seems like it would be okay. And it's one-handed, so you get an offhand with it. But let's see, the snowball that it shoots out is blocked by terrain, and I think like even like small bits of terrain. So it's like really not that great to use. And also you could just use other tank weapons because I don't think it does enough damage to really have that oomph. Great Frost seems like could be okay. Doesn't really do enough damage. Glacial Staff got buffed not that long ago. Can do okay damage if you're like crazy IP, but like people just walk out of it. So why bother? Icicle Staff. This is a super good support weapon. It creates a big AoE slowing field by 50% slow. So you usually combo this with the Knight Armor that I'm sure I'll talk about at some point. And also, I think in ZvZ you always take, I think just in Frost in general, you like always take Frost Nova. This gives you a blink that freezes people, and it also gives you an iframe for 0.2 seconds. Permafrost would be the go-to damage dealing options. Just a quick comparison, we're looking at tier 4, but like this is 580 damage, this is 421 damage, I guess that's there. 462 damage at 850 IP. This thing does 580 damage at 840 IP. So like this evil can actually do some damage. It's not a crazy amount of damage, but you combine that with your typical Frost setup. I think I made a note in my builds to talk about like the build for Frost, but it can do some damage. It's not, personal opinion, it's not that great, but you know it can do some damage. My main gripe is that you have to like stand there and cast multiple times, whereas a lot of the other good DPS options are kind of you cast like once or twice and then you're done. But you get some blinks, you get some iframes, you know, you have a stun along with some decent damage, so you know it's not a bad option. And Frost in general is like a pretty good weapon line. I mean, mainly just because Permafrost is good for literally everything. So, Arcane. This is our support tree. And you can see here that I am a support main, though I actually maxed out swords before this. Alright, one-handed Arcane. This shoots out a little ball that will silence and purge enemies. I'm back and forth on one-handed Arcane. So on one hand, it's pretty quick and has a super short cooldown. You know, it's base 20 seconds. You know, you pair that with like an assassin hood, you get it down to 5 seconds, kind of thing. You also get to use an offhand with it, so you can get like a shield for more tankiness or a mistcaller for more CC or cooldown reduction. Doesn't really do damage. And also the radius is kind of iffy in my opinion. And it can also be sometimes difficult to actually hit the correct targets. But in situations like a territory or a castle where people will kind of bunch up against walls and you get a clear shot because you just have to hit them over the wall that they're right up against, then it can be super powerful because it'll interrupt any spells that they're casting as well as purge off their buffs. So like Night Helms, Royal Hoods, Royal Sandals, whatever sprint they have, that kind of thing. So it's pretty good. Can be kind of bad in like chaotic, open world fights. Witcher Staff. This thing, I think, is the most damaging Arcane E out of the three that do actually do damage. Puts a little circle and then pulls people in, and does a very tiny slow. My main gripe with this, so one, it's pretty small, especially when compared to the Camlin. But the main gripe is that the slow on it is just really lackluster. So like you'll pull them in for a split second, and then they'll all walk out scot-free. And it's like barely enough time for people to follow up on it. So it's pretty hard to get use out of it. And in ZvZ, when we'll talk about the Camlin later, like why would you have this when you could just bring another Camlin? Great Arcane. This will freeze people in a relatively small circle, and it kind of freezes them in time, so they're immune to damage, and they're untargetable essentially. This used to be like kind of a meme thing because it would freeze people for 4 seconds, but it would only make them immune to damage for like 3 seconds. And so you'd pair this with a Brimstone staff since they were the same area, and you could get some like really fat hits off. But generally in a ZvZ, if you use this, you're just going to screw over your teammates, and everyone will flame the living shit out of you. So I would not recommend you bring this unless you have like express permission from your caller and like a solid plan of what you're gonna do with it. Occult Staff puts down a decently long corridor that will speed up your allies and slow enemies. It's mostly used for speeding up allies, and it's also because it's instant cast, that opens you up to using Empowering Beam that we'll talk about later. So you'll typically see this in like, well, it's hit or miss when you see it in bomb squads because, which we'll talk about later, the term bomb squads, because it's so long that like it's kind of a giveaway. If you're gonna use it for its full effectiveness, it kind of gives away the fact that like, oh hey, here comes the bomb squad because there's the occult stuff, and then it clues in your enemies to counter you faster. But having a couple of these can go a decent ways to speeding up your Zerg's movement ability. Because I don't think it has a target cap. One of the problems being though is that you'll tend to self-clump because people will see the occult, they'll try and use it, and then next thing you know, you have 20 people stacked on top of each other. So it can also be a bait for your own team. Next up is Enigmatic Staff. For this one, you stop and channel a shield on a target for, 9 seconds, and it will refresh itself every 1 second. This is pretty darn powerful, but it can also be purged. It's fairly easy to interrupt. So I would say it's good to have several, but it's not. You're not always going to get like 100% effectiveness out of it. Oh man, this video is already too long. I need a drink. Alright, Locus. This is the most common ZvZ support that you'll see. This will summon it summons this little black bubble on the ground that will slowly expand. It makes you immune to CC while you're channeling it, and what that bubble does is it will remove all um, all like positive effects from your enemies, as well as cleansing crowd control and like pierces and stuff from your teammates, as well as giving them damage resistances. Um, so yeah, this is kind of like your de facto when the enemy tries to clump you, you respond with a locust to try and allow your allies to declump. But there's a lot of uses for this, and which I've made a video on. So maybe I'll link that. I mean, maybe I'll rename it to kind of be part of the series, but we'll see. Last up is Evensong, whatever you want to call it. This shoots down a ball that will hit up to 5 enemies, and then each of those people will have an aura around them that will decrease healing received, damage dealt, and also slow them. But then these auras stack with each other. So if you can hit 5 people that are clumped up next to each other, then they will be very slow, receive no healing, and do no damage. This thing can also be very powerful, but it is very easy to cleanse. We were just talking about the locusts. You're going to use this on a clump of enemies, so you can hit 5 people. But if the enemy is also playing correctly, those 5 enemies, or however many enemies are in the clump, are going to be under a locust, and so your Evensong will just get purged off right away. So it's hit or miss. It can be good, can be not so good. In 20v20, this ended up being fairly powerful. I stopped following the meta when my team stopped doing it, which was right before the level 6, the last high level 1 of the season. But shortly before that, I know Elevate, kind of one of the better teams, started using like double Evensongs, because you could cleanse 1, but you couldn't cleanse 2 as effectively, especially with assassin hoods and getting them out. So yeah, maybe in smaller scale where there aren't so many cleanses or so many locusts, then you can get some good use out of it. But yeah, we'll end Arcane there. Oh wait, the W's. Let's go to a level 6 one so we get all the W's. Okay, so most of your arcanes are going to be on cleanse. If you have some people that you're trying to max out their damage, then you want empowering beam. But you only really want to use empowering beam on an arcane that doesn't have other channeled abilities. Which I think I make my case for that in the Locust video. I'm not going to bother remaking that case. But yeah, so like your enigmatics and your locusts, they have long channeled E's. Chances are they might be on demon armors as well. It's another channel. And also motivating cleanses. Well, just cleanses in general are quite powerful. For Qs, the bubble is perfectly fine. Having some magic shocks around is definitely not a bad thing, especially if your enemy has a lot of beetles. Magic shock is a good option for immediately shutting down beetles. Which brings us, magic shock brings us to our other W ability, Mimic, which depending on how lazy I am, I'll pull up a list of abilities that it gives you, but it basically it gives you a copy of another weapon's W ability, which can be really useful, but it'll often go into mimicking yourself so that you can magic shock again, and get more silences down. Um, or yeah, just like Arcane is one of the. You're not going to have a whole lot of cleanses necessarily. You're going to have Arcanes on their W, and then you're probably going to have people with mercenary hoods. Um, but like targeted cleanses for your tanks, you're going to want Arcanes for that. So default cleanse, possibly mimic. I guess I would also point out the passive Hush. Every 5 spell casts, your next attack silences the target for however many time that scales. So if you're taking shield and you're like spamming shield on people, you'll pretty frequently have this up, and then you can use an auto attack to also silence people. Alright, holy. Maybe I should like break this down into smaller chunks. Alright, Holy Staff. This is a single target heal that I don't think is even good in single target, I'm pretty sure. Maybe it is, I don't know, I could be wrong. Holofall. This is currently pretty strong. Holy Flash is quite good. This being a one-handed staff means you can use an offhand. In ZvZs, you're always going to use Holy Orb for basically everything. Because this gives you more AoE healing. The other options are not good AoE healing. Yeah, most of our holies, I don't know why I'm talking about this in the opposite order, but most of your holies are probably going to be on generous heal, because this is kind of like the bigger heal. But if you build for it, Holy Flash can be quite good. It's a decent heal, and also kind of gives you more like mobility and a little bit of CC as a healer, which I don't really know enough about Holofall to talk about it. It's definitely pretty good in like 20v20. I think it's good in 5v5s at the moment. But I think it's also getting nerfed soon, so probably not even good for me to like talk about it that much. But it's currently, this patch, decent, probably about to die off. Life Touch Staff, this is like you heal someone in like melee range. That's we don't really care about single target heals. Great Holy Staff. This is an AoE healing staff, but it requires you to stand still and channel, which is not great, and 2, it heals around you, which you are often going to want to be healing tanks, so you don't want to be standing next to the tanks. Really, you don't want to be standing next to anyone who's taking damage. So having melee range heals is not great in a ZvZ. Fallen will be our default just healing staff in general. This was that circle that I talked about in the previous video that will kind of charge up but then explode with healing. Heals up to 10 people. It also cleanses people and debuffs, so that's an extra added little benefit. But yeah, this is a fat heal. It'll like, if you have decent IP and stuff, then it'll like top off a lot of your squishier characters, and it will save your tanks and whoever's in the clump dying if it pops off at the right time. Redemption throws the knee that kind of bounces around between people. It only heals one person at a time, and it's like a single target heal, and it jumps to like the closest target, so it's gonna get lost. It's not gonna heal whoever you want it to heal. The main strength of Redemption Staff is having it like bounce back and forth between 2 people that both need healing. That's not gonna happen. Divine Staff, is a single target like giant shield. You will sometimes see this on like someone who's just pocket healing the shot caller. You don't like need one of these. It can maybe sort of be helpful, but yeah, you could also just drop another fallen. Yeah, so basically, if you're gonna heal in ZvZs, you're probably gonna be playing fallen. Maybe if you've been playing a Holy a while and like you kind of know what you're doing, maybe you'll play some Hollowfall. All right, fire. All right, one-handed fire. This is a single target nuke. We don't care about that. If you're going for single target nukes, you'd play Crossbow, the regular playing Crossbow. This and because it just straight up does more damage than this, and also gives you a pierce. Uh, anyways, Wildfire Staff. This seems like it would be good. It shoots a ball that rolls through people, does a decent amount of damage, and does a little bit of a burn over time. I think it suffers from the same disappearing effects as the Horror Frost, so it's like kind of bad over terrain. I could be wrong about that. But really, it's just why would you use this when you could use a Brimstone Staff? I guess it's one-handed, but I don't think you really need an offhand for everything. Like the good offhands are like cooldown reduction and cast speed, or like a shield. But you don't really need that with a fire staff. And it's also like it's just not as good as a brimstone. So why would you use it? Great fire staff. This this thing is like a lower cooldown, less damage brimstone. So, but we don't care about a lower cooldown because our teammates are only going to hit every 30 seconds. And we need to hit roughly with our teammates. And so if we hit without our teammates, you're doing literally nothing. So why bother? Right? Brimstone Staff. This is one of the like top tier DPS weapons, especially in the current state of balance. As we get to the other DPS weapons, we'll kind of point out like which one is kind of like the go-to weapon for that tree for ZvZ. And then within like between trees, there's kind of like they fall in and out of the meta. I think Brimstone has like always been like pretty solid. Sometimes other weapons will kind of creep out as being like particularly good, and then once they get nerfed, it's back to Brimstone is like good shit. I guess for what it does is that you cast, it puts a circle on the ground. A second later, meteor hits it, big fucking damage, can't be reflected. It's beautiful. It does have a knockback effect to it, which, while thematic, is really a detriment because sometimes if a clump isn't tightly stacked, then you can maybe knock people just far enough away that they're no longer in the clump. And then if other brimstones come, you know, the first brimstone hits, knocks a couple of people out. Second brimstone hits, knocks a couple more people out, and the third and fourth and fifth ones just like don't hit anyone, kind of thing. Infernal Staff, this is more of like a uncoordinated meme weapon. You see this in like dungeon fights in the old faction fight. But if you're like good players, we'll just pull this away from your teammates, and you know, maybe it's just my opinion, but this only does actually does damage when you're killing hordes of people in flat 4. like flat tier 4 gear with 700 IP. You know, people see like it go off in a dungeon, they're like, oh wow, look at how many kills I'm getting. But it's like, first of all, you're hitting 40 uncoordinated people. You targeted some troll who's just trying to kill all his teammates, so he's purposely running it into more people, and they're all in 0 IP gear. So like, does it really do damage? You know. All right. Blazing is it's okay. It's okay. It's not, could be, it's not bad. This summons a giant fire tornado. It's pretty dramatic, I guess. And it does pretty good damage, but it's targeted in a area, and it's damage over time, which, as we talked about, what we really want is big oomph, which, this does what? 200 damage every point save, 5 seconds for 5 seconds. This just straight up, boom, 1300 damage. This is the only weapon that we've looked at so far that does this kind of damage instantly. So blazing can be good in places that like are guaranteed to have clumps. So like in a castle, in a territory, you get these like points where people are basically guaranteed to clump up there with a regular cadence. I don't know if that's what I'm trying to say, but whatever. And so yeah, sometimes people like if you put it down where they know that they're supposed to go, they'll just like run into it and die to it because I don't know, people are dumb. And lastly, we have Dawnsong. So this is it shoots out like a giant phoenix, looks super cool or whatever, does some okay damage, sets the ground on fire, does some damage over time, but also reduces healing by 40%. Basically, my thoughts on this weapon is if you wanted to do damage, sorry for the Discord pings, if you wanted to do damage, just bring a brimstone. If you wanted to do healing reduction, bring a demonic. You could just have two people do the two rolls better than the one weapon trying to do both. For W's, we have Wall of Flames, top notch for open world fights. Puts down a wall of fire in front of you that will fear enemies that run into it. It says that mobs flee only once, but players they can walk into it like 3 or 4 times before it goes down. This is particularly good for like keeping melee players off of you, stuff like that. If you're trying to do as much damage as possible, you throw in a fireball. Big thing to know is that this is reflectable. We saw here in our Brimstone E that this damage cannot be reflected. The fireball can be reflected. And this thing does some pretty good damage for a W. I know there's a fire player in my guild who has one-shot himself by reflecting a fireball. Fire artillery is I don't know how I feel about this. It was good in 20v20. It does some solid damage. But in ZvZ, open world, like, when are you going to have time to stop and channel this thing and actually do damage? I guess the main point is, like, when is this actually going to do enough concentrated damage that it matters? And the answer is not often. But if you want to stand up on the castle wall and mark yourself as a giant target, accomplish absolutely nothing, and get yourself killed, then this is a great option for you. That's my fire rants. I'm not talking about the passives because for most of these, because the frankly, I don't think they really matter that much. I mean, like, okay, maybe I'll get hate for saying that. There's like, most of them have a very obvious, straightforward button, or like pick, but yeah, they don't really matter that much. Alright, offhand. Okay, Quarterstaff. This is a tank tree. Alright, Quarterstaff. This just got reworked. Um, I don't know. I think it probably does more damage than most of these do. But you're going to be wearing plate. Like, it doesn't do enough damage that you could warrant wearing cloth or leather with it. And so if you're wearing plate, this isn't going to do nearly enough damage. And it's not really a long enough CC for it to matter. Especially when you could just bring a soul scythe. You could maybe see this as like a disruption tank, kind of jumping around the enemy backline. Uh, but I don't know. I think it's not enough. It's not enough CC. Ironclad. In ZvZ, this is a meme. Um, it is. You are likely to screw up your team's clumping ability if you use this when you don't know exactly what you're doing. But it technically has some potential for like enemy disruption. But I guess one of the big problems being is that it's stopped by Nighthelm, so you're not actually going to stop an enemy engage by yourself with this because they're just going to Nighthelm and run through you and laugh at you for being a meme. And if you fuck up your team's clump, you're going to get the shit flamed out of you. Double-bladed staff. This is a mobility escape slash ganking weapon. It doesn't belong in ZvZ. Black Monk staff. This throws down like a spinny blade that does negligible damage, slows some people, and reduces damage they deal. It's cleansable. It'll get purged off by a locust. The slow doesn't stack up fast enough. People walk through it as if they weren't slowed, especially when they're sprinting. They're not even going to notice this. And it's only like remotely viable in places like castles or territories where there's set places that people go. And it just doesn't like stack up. It just doesn't do enough to be worth it, especially because it's just going to get purged or cleansed or whatever. Soul Scythe, this is our main quarterstaff weapon. This thing throws a giant tornado that will knock out people and slow people in an area for 80%, which is pretty big. It says 20 seconds, but that seems extreme. I don't know if that's right. Yeah, this gets blocked by Nighthelm, so you won't see a lot of these. But if Nighthelm didn't exist, then this would be a super solid tank choice. You often see shot callers on this because it has a decent amount of mobility, and so you can kind of get around faster. Yeah, you can easily shot call on like any of the other tank weapons or even like support weapons like a locust or icicle, but I think this is it's really easy because you're super mobile. Well, you're quite mobile, and it's easy to like sync up your E with the rest of your groups. Staff of Balance. This thing's a meme. I don't care what you say, Johnny. This weapon is a meme. It creates a cloud of rocks around you that slow people by 50%, which I think they recently buffed the slow amount. So which isn't that bad, admittedly. 50% is okay. And also reduces their healing received, increases your resistances, negates your own healing. So it makes you tankier and slows everyone around you. The healing received is not really important. It's mostly there for like the slow. You're like a moving slow field. But I have a hard time seeing this as being effective enough to be worth using. Okay, for W's, this is like a damage option, whatever, you're a tank. Stun run. This gives you an extra little sprint and allows you to give you a single target stun. So this is a decently solid option for adding to your mobility. Forceful swing. This is quite critical in castles, where this will stop enemies from being able to use normal attacks, which is what the demolition hammer is when you're attacking the gates. So you can stop enemies from hammering by using forceful swing. But it is cleansable, so keep that in mind. So this is your mobility option. This is your castles protect the gates option, like defense. And this is your kind of main CC, or main added CC. This is like a kind of, it says a cone, but it's like a square area. Knocks them in the air for 1 second. And I think knockups ignore like CC duration, so it's decent if they don't have night helms, which when you really care about using this, they will. So it's kind of meh, but it's if you can catch them without night helms, then it's pretty solid. And your Q will generally be cartwheel for the added mobility, and it's also like a little mini interrupt, which can be useful. Alright, carrying on with the weapons. I already went through this once, and I apparently deleted what I had recorded or something when I was clearing out space. So if I seem more rushed, it's because I've already done this, and it was like an hour. Daggers. This is single target. This is single target. This is ganking. We'll get back to Bloodletter. This is single target. This is single target. Obviously, those are garbage. Let's talk about Bloodletter first. Bloodletter is decent because it is an execute. So it does more damage when it's lower health. When you get to higher tiers, it starts doing some decent amount of damage. You get the cooldown reduction, and you're also pretty mobile as a melee, so you can kind of like chase down people that survive a clump. You'll usually see like good Bloodletter players have quite a few kills at the end of the fight, which is it's a bit of a. It's not exactly that they're doing tons of damage; it's that they're cleaning up kills, which is still very useful. Generally, you run like a melee bruiser build. We'll talk about those in the armor video. And so you kind of go for like sustained damage. We'll talk about the Qs and Ws in a second. Bridled Fury, this is our go-to clap DPS weapon at the moment. This thing does buttloads of damage. Wasn't hit too hard by the AoE escalation nurse, so it's not like weeping and wailing and stuff like that are just kind of limp at the moment. This thing hits really hard. It's also Most melee weapons, I think all the melee weapons are reflectable, but Bridled Fury has this jump back portion of it, and that jump back actually counts as an iframe, so you are immune. So you immune the reflected damage. I don't know if that's intended. That might get changed at some point, but currently it's there. It's pretty strong. uh, Most people are running this with a clap build at the moment, so Royal Hood, Royal Sandals. We'll talk about that in the armor videos. So you usually kind of just go full glass cannon. Because you're full glass cannon, you'll generally take Assassin Spirit. So this allows you to get, as with a lot of the melee weapons, you have like these stacks. Your E does more damage the more stacks you have. You can get stacks with any of your Qs, but this is a single target stack. This gives you charges whenever you hit people, and this you can stack up on yourself. You can use either of the two AoE ones, or sorry, you can use Deadly Sweep or Assassin Spirit. It doesn't particularly matter. You can get 3 stacks, which is your max stacks, with a single Deadly Swipe, which makes it fine. I tend to lean on, if you're going the glass cannon build, then you might as well run Assassin Spirit and use it as like you can charge up while you're safely out of danger, and then sprint in, go ham, pop your shit, and then jump out. But that's if you plan on not doing any sort of sustained damage, which you probably aren't if you're a full cloth melee. For W's, your go-to is going to be Throwing Blades. This does some decent damage for a W if you can get enough escalation off of it, and also gets you 25% movement. Wow, 25% movement speed per stack, so up to 75%, and then 15% damage per stack, which is 45%. So between Royal Hood, Throwing Blades, Royal Sandals, and if you can, Cleric Sandal or Cleric Robe, you can basically get max damage boost, by yourself. Other dagger options, particularly if you're playing Blood earlier, you can grow Chain Slash, just as like a little bit more sustained AoE damage. If you're running Spectre Jacket, which you probably won't anymore because it's about to get nerfed, but maybe in the future it gets buffed again, who knows. You might run Dash just to like stay on top of your target more. You'll also see like scouts often run a Bloodletter, and then you'd use Dash because you're more concerned with escaping than you are with actually fighting. Alright, let's move on to Nature. This is our other healing tree. Go through it quickly. This only heals 5 people, and it heals like the 5 closest people to you, which is super inconvenient in a ZvZ. I think it's the 5 closest. It could be 5 random people. I'm not entirely sure off the top of my head because you only ever use this if you're only healing a group of 5 people. Iron Root Staff. Oh, and if you're thinking about using this as like a tank weapon, you're memeing, and that's not what this video is for. This is a 2-person thing. This is a single target thing. This is a single target thing. Blight Staff, Rampant Staff, and Wild Staff are going to be our go-to choices. So Blight Staff just recently got buffed or reworked. It no longer slows you. The nice thing about this is that it makes you CC immune. And so you can you can cast it while moving. So one of the problems that people often have with Nature is that it's kind of it's a heal over time, and the E ability is usually static. So we've been playing with Rampant Staff and Wild Staff for years now, and these put effects on the ground that heal you over time. The nice thing about Blight Staff is that you can use it while you're moving, and you can stay on top of the people that need healing. One of the unfortunate things is that it requires you to be next to the people that you want to heal, which is not always a good thing. But if you're doing a lot of kiting, so you're fighting outnumbered a lot, then this can be kind of handy. Rampant Staff technically has the highest potential output. Um, if you have enough people standing in it, it will heal more than the other two staves. Bloodstaff technically heals the least amount out of the three, but it does require, a bunch of allies to be standing in it and stay standing in it. It also has a long cooldown. I think that's really my biggest reason why you'd play Wild Staff over Rampant Staff is that the 45-second cooldown is quite long. Lastly, we have Wild Staff. Oh, I guess this puts down a long like rectangular carpet on the ground. Wild Staff puts down a circle on the ground that heals up to 10 allies. All three of these are up to 10 allies. I think all the good healing spells are up to 10 allies. Um, and this heals it just heals over time. It's very straightforward. For W's, let's look at a artifact weapon. So you have two options, though. Most nature healers tell. Okay, I haven't talked to most nature healers, but the consensus seems to be that going single target Q with Breeze is the way to go. When I played nature, it was a couple years ago, and the go-to was shrooms and cleanse. A lot of people, when Breeze came out, they told me, no, you should go Breeze, and I was like, nah, cleanse is OP as fuck. So, but I think they've nerfed mushrooms since then. So I leave it up to you guys. Single target Q and then Breeze, and then that's kind of like a big chunkier healing. Or you can try mushrooms and cleanse because the cleanses are super strong. This is a single target. This is a single target. We don't really care about those. Alright, so that's it for nature. Spear. This just doesn't do enough damage. It's like a mobility skill. You saw some of these back when like Spectre Jacket was super meta, and then you could have a shit ton of them, just because they were really mobile and you could get in, stay on top of people, and then also like get out pretty easily. But this just doesn't really do damage in a ZvZ setting. Iron Spear, you sometimes see this as like a sort of bruiser stun bot. I don't think it's really good. Like you could just, just play a bruiser that does damage and let the tanks do the CC, in my opinion. But I've seen some people with like a soldier armor build, and they'll stack up the soldier armor and then throw this for like a really long stun. I think you could just Hunter Shoes Grovekeeper and it would be fine. And then you don't even have to worry about people getting in the way of your stun. But I guess, it does more damage than a tank. But I don't know. I think it's kind of a meme. Daybreaker. This is like, its big thing is that it purges in a line. It doesn't really do enough damage to make it worth it. And if we wanted to purge things, we could just Locust or one-handed Arcane. We don't really need a Daybreaker for that. Pike, this is single target. Glaive, this is single target. Skip Spear Hunter for now. Trinity Spear. So this really, it's the problem with Trinity Spear is that the target radius is just too small to be useful in a ZvZ. It's kind of like Kingmaker, we'll talk about later in the sword line. It's just too hard to get good escalation off of it. And because it has all this extra like move speed, attack speed buff stuff, it's kind of on damage. But you will see this for hitting hideouts. Whenever you're hammering something, you can use Occult Staff and Spectral no, the E is called Spectral Giant, Journey Spear, and a Quarterstaff to increase the attack speed of your hammers and break down gates faster. So you'll often see that. Every once in a while you'll see it in a bomb squad because of the move speed and because of the cast speed increase. But yeah, that's more of a sometimes thing. Okay, back to Spear Hunter. This is your go-to ZvZ weapon. I have mixed feelings about it. You throw a spear, it does kind of damage, but it also reduces resistances and then leaves behind a trail that does damage every 0.5 seconds. One of the nice things is that with inner focus, and then if you go like a full clap build, if you charge up inner focus, you can essentially hit the damage cap by yourself. So you don't need like a beamer to do maximum damage. It is a dot, so it does require people to stand in it, which it does proc every 0.5 seconds. It's pretty fast. You know, if you can hit a clump with it, it'll do some serious damage. Especially because it's after you pierce them, it is magical damage. But I don't know, it just doesn't quite have that oomph. But if you're a spear player, it is a viable option. For W's, you go inner focus. If you're trying to like do a bruiser thing, you could go force to spears. Some people will try to beam, do like reflects with deflecting spin, and then impale it's decent damage for a W, and harpoon you're probably memeing. I guess just to talk about this quick, because glaive is also like a pull-in weapon, and oftentimes people are like, new people to ZvZs get this idea, they read this and they're like, oh, I can like pull people in and we'll just assassinate them. But it's like, one, you're gonna pull in a tank most of the time, and they're just gonna res pot and get extreme focus fire protection. And then once you're all clumping up to hit this guy, because there's only so much like in order to hit someone, you have to be close enough to actually do that. They're just gonna call and engage on it, and then you're gonna regret having pulled them in. If there is like, I don't know, if you're like under a tower and trying to meme and pull people in and kill them, you can use harpoon then. Go for it. Next up is bows. Regular bow is single target. We don't care about that. Sorry, my Discord ping. War bow is single target. Whispering bow is single target. We don't care about those. In general, okay, well, let's talk about bow of Badon first. This is like a meme support weapon. It can occasionally have decent impact. So in like a castle or a territory fight where people are engaging in like tight areas and so they're kind of self-clumping on their engage, if you can get a Badani into that, it can interrupt a lot of damage. That being said, it's just a discount eagle. You could just have an eagle and get all the effects that the eagle does too and do the same thing as a bow of Badon. Maybe I'm just not big brain enough. Maybe, if you had like a couple of bow of Badons around and you're like, you know what you're doing, maybe it works, but it doesn't really do damage, so it's kind of a meme. Longbow is our basic visual weapon. So longbow and whaling bow both got hit by the AoE escalation nerfs pretty hard. So your go-to option is going to be Mist Piercer. It does a ton of damage. But if you want to run like 1600 IP or 1700 IP kind of thing, you can, get some solid damage out of these. Especially if you're hitting, large, unfocused fired clumps. Which, maybe this is a good time to talk about that. Most of the weapons in the game that have AoE can look like they do a lot of damage if you're hitting large, unfocused fired clumps. And the thing is, that just doesn't happen that often. So, usually, the weapons that I've been saying, like, these are your go-tos, these are, like, the solid choices, it's because they do damage even when the clump isn't quite so big and the focus fire, is stacked up a little bit. So yeah, that's my take on this weapon can be good if you're just good. And it's like it's not really if you're good, it's if the right moment happens. Which it's not always going to happen. In fact, it's frequently not going to happen. Okay, so longbow is you channel on an area and you shoot down like a rain of bows. You do have to root yourself for this, which is kind of awkward, but there's crossbows that do that too. It's not a terribly big deal. If you're running longbow, always explosive arrows. You're immune if you don't do that because explosive arrows is where a lot of the damage from longbow is. Other one is wailing bow. So, kind of the big thing about wailing bow is that it has a decently long range, 24 meters. It does more damage the more people it hits, up to like 4 targets or something. And the arrow itself is unreflectable, but the explosive arrows, I believe, is reflectable. And so the E does proc explosive arrows, which is where, like I was saying, a lot of the damage is going to happen. It's fairly straightforward. It's instant cast. It's long range. It used to do a lot of damage. It used to be a super solid weapon. This was kind of like our go-to bomb squad weapon. And it still would be probably if it did damage. You do run into a lot of players though that they use the long range as an excuse to be cowards. You still want to get like right up to the tanks, if not right past the tanks, and shoot this thing, through the tanks and hit the back line. Or just, hit up, more than 4 people in the back line. For any of the long range weapons, don't let that be an excuse to be a pussy. Okay, Mist Piercer. This thing, you activate it, and then you have like 4 charges that you have to use fairly close together, and you shoot 4 arrows. When this thing came out, it was like massively busted. It had a 30-meter range. It procced explosive arrows. Now it doesn't. It doesn't do either of those. It only has a 24-meter range, so it's still long range. It's just not absurd. And it doesn't proc explosive arrows. The damage is reflectable, so you do have to watch out for that. But with all 4 shots, you do a pretty solid amount of damage. Some of these numbers also, you may be seeing the numbers as I pull them up, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what the value is for like someone that's properly spec'd. Because I think these numbers factor in your like it's your IP with the weapon, and I'm not spec'd into all of these weapons. So like I was 100 spec Bridled Fury, but I'm not 100 spec Mist Piercer, that kind of thing. So take the numbers that you're seeing with a grain of salt. Assuming that I even have this as the background footage. Okay, over to crossbows. Alright, snipe crossbow. This is, if you're going to single target assassinate someone, this is the weapon you do it with. You go the clap build, and there's 2 reasons. One, it does a shit ton of damage. That's all it does. And it has a channel on it, which you can get around by using a Scholar Robe. And then also, you have Thunder Shot. And so Thunder Shot reduces the resistances of the target based on how much health they have. So the more health they have, the bigger your resistance shred is. And so what you do is like you use all your power up abilities, you use your Scholar Robe, and you run up, you Thunder Shot someone, and then you Snipe Shot them. And because you get this, fat resistance pierce on them, then your snipe does even more damage, and you'll end up doing more damage than any other single target build that we've talked about. Which is why none of them matters, because if you're trying to do one thing, which is one-shot someone, one-shot a singular person, this is the best at it, so none of the other options matter. Energy Shaper. This is kind of our go-to ZvZ weapon at the moment. The Divine Engine. So it is a channel, but you are uninterruptible, which is pretty handy. We'll talk about Siege Bow later. And a lot of the other weapons are interruptible, which is a pretty big hindrance. So not being able to be interrupted is quite good. It does have a 26 meter range, which is pretty big. Remember that more range means it's more easier to hit more people, which means it's more damage for everyone. It is damage over time, which is kind of but it is every 0.3 seconds, so you do get a lot of damage off rather quickly. And you can move the beam, so even as the clump starts to spread, you can kind of move the beam a little bit and get a little bit more extra damage off. 4 seconds is a long time to be, standing in place, especially in the, it depends on your ZvZs. Sometimes you'll get 4 seconds easy, but other times maybe you'll only get like 2 seconds, and you have to be ready to cancel it and get on the move again. Heavy Crossbow is a very small AoE. And it has like a weird stand time on it, so even though it's instant cast, I don't know, it doesn't do damage. It's for like small scale stuff. Siege Bow, this is one of your other ZvZ options. So this has a 20 meter range, and it's this like big frontal cone, kind of like the crossbow mobs, except much bigger, and it does do magic damage, which is nice, and it does percent max health true damage, which is kind of nice. So it's one of the things where it's like, even if you're not very high spec, you can still get some use out of this because of the percent health true damage. The damage is kind of lackluster. It's only 1 second every 4 seconds. Wow. 4 seconds every 1 second. So it is kind of meh, unless you're like high spec and high, like running high IP. If you don't have like high spec, this is probably like a solid option. But it is easy to interrupt. It doesn't do its damage very fast. But you got the max health true damage, so that's something. Also, 2% max health is not a lot. So yeah, it's kind of sad. It's kind of but it is guaranteed to do something. Well, unless you get interrupted, which is very easy to do. I don't like siege bows. I tried playing siege bow to get footage for some of these ZvZ videos because I have spec in crossbows for some reason, and I regretted it. It was not an enjoyable time. Anyways, light crossbow. This is a small scale thing. Super good in small scale, but small scale. Weaving repeater. This thing comes in and out of the meta as the top weapon. It's another one of those that got hit pretty hard by the AoE escalation nerfs. It also had some touch-ups to make it like easier for people to see and tell who's which side the mine belongs to, which used to be a problem. Um, but yeah, it was pretty nice because it's instant cast and um, it calculates like your damage percentage and whatnot based on when the mine explodes. So you run up, you throw out the mine. It has like a second or two charge up time, and then it'll explode, which means that you can you can throw the mine and then get your power ups, and it'll calculate based on whatever your power ups are at the time of explosion, which gives you some more leeway in how you want to use it. Bullet casters are single target, so we don't care about those. Go to W's. So we'll go to other abilities. You generally use explosive bolt. Um, you can fit like one of these off after your combo, just to add in a little extra damage. Um, you can also use it to shoot the ground and charge up the. Here we go. The Furious passive, and so you can make it so that whenever you shoot your E off, it shoots with the Furious passive attached to it. You can also use caltrops for that. You can also use caltrops to just kind of set up little slowing fields for people that are chasing you. That's kind of useful. You can use Noise Eraser for dealing with like beetles and stuff. That can be very useful. And if you guys are having a problem with like tanks in your backline a lot, you can switch. You can run, or at least have some of your guys run Thundershot, and that way you can pierce the tanks inside of you. Moving on to Hammer. Alright, this is our second. Yeah, we already talked about Quarterstaff, so this is our second big tank option. So most of the hammers are just different forms of stunning people. And when you have different forms of the same thing, you pick the one that does it best. Right. So, hammer stuns people around you. Great. Great hammer. You dash and stuns people, and also knocks them back a little bit. Hodge will skip because that doesn't stun people. Tomb hammer. Small targeted ground effect stun people. Pole hammer. Small line stun people. Forge hammers. This is like a melee build. It's kind of a meme. It doesn't really do damage. So why are you trying to? You're not a tank. You don't do damage. What are you even doing here? Alright, and then Grovekeeper is a dash that makes you CC immune while you're dashing, stuns people for I think the most amount of time or like similar, and increases your resistances by a shit ton for a couple seconds. So we have circle stun, stationary circle stun, dash stun, small targeted stun, small line stun, big AoE stun with a dash on it that makes you CC immune and gives you resistances. Obviously, we go for the Grovekeeper. This thing is your king of locking down people. With 100 shoes, you'll get, and if you can time it with your Dread-Laden Fighting passive, you'll get some long stuns, like 5 or 6 seconds kind of thing. It is gross. The other hammer that's worth talking about is Hand of Justice. So this is actually sort of a clumping weapon. You kind of like spin your hammer around in a sort of like dash. It's towards a direction, and you'll pull people in and kind of stun them a little bit as you do. And then at the end, you do a little slam. One of the nice things about this is that you can work with the camlins, which we'll talk about in a second, and you can use it to either move the camlin to catch more people or to pull more people into a camlin. So it's kind of like a supporting you. You're like a backup tank or support tank. I don't know. You help the tanks. And of course, you can kind of create clumps on your own because you'll pull people in. It's not as good as a camlin for that, but it can do some work when working together with a camlin. For W's, you have one real option and kind of a second option. So inertia ring is super good. Puts the giant ring on the ground. It is kind of thin, but it's a 90% slow in that area, which is fat. It can get cleansed. You can Scholar Sandals sprint through it. But for what it is, for like a W ability, this is pretty good. Especially when you're kiting or trying to pull back from an engage, you can slow people down, get them caught up. The other one is slowing charge. This is a dash that slows people. This can kind of make you a little more survivable since you have mobility, but you don't really need that as a Grove Keeper. It can be handy with Hand of Justice because this is more about you want to get into position in order to capitalize on your other tanks. I will put in a small mention for the two member. This thing does only have a 14-second cooldown, which is pretty spicy. Because the stun is also quite long, but the radius is very small. I think that's it for hammers. Take Ironbreaker. It's your own small little pierce. For maces, okay, so Mace is just an inferior Grove Keeper. It is one-handed, so you can use an offhand with it and maybe get some effect out of that. But you could also just run a Grove Keeper. Incubus Mace, this is like a PvE option. It reduces things max health. It's not really relevant for PvP. Which, I've always kind of wondered, because it seems like it would be useful, but in practice it just doesn't seem useful. So, who knows? Leave it for the PvE. Or prove me wrong, whatever. Heavy Mace, this is more of a small scale thing. We don't particularly care about silences in ZvZ unless you're trying to interrupt like a beetle or something. Because you could just because what we really care about is hard CCing people in place so that it's easier for the damage to land. That's like really what most of the tank abilities are for. It's locking people in place so that your DPS abilities will actually hit someone instead of enemies just walking out of it. The radius is also kind of small. Then we have Camlin Mace. This is our default clumping people option. So this, you shoot out like this red line on the ground, it'll hit someone attached to them, and then it'll put this big red circle around them, and after a second and a half, it'll pull everyone in. I don't really know what to say about this, except that it's really good. The area is very large, it pulls people in, clumps them up, stuns them for a second. Does it even say that it stuns them? Stuns for 0.95 seconds. It's a small stun, but it's long enough that you can like follow up with like a snare charge and stuff, and that they won't be having any time to like spread out or anything like that. It's also, for some reason, like doesn't get affected by cleanse. I think it's just because it's such the stun is so small that like with all the server lag that goes on in Albion, that it just doesn't like have time to cleanse it. I don't know. It's weird. Morningstar is um, it's kind of like a hybrid Camlin Grovekeeper. Um, so what it does is it channels an AoE root around you. So you have to stop and channel it, and then everyone around you will get rooted. Um, I believe it reapplies, so if people get cleansed, if they don't get out fast enough, it will reapply. Um, if you get a full channel off, they'll stay rooted. The more relevant thing is that you can combo this with the air compressor W as your pull-in ability. So this will, after like a second and a half, it'll pull everyone within 7 meters, which is smaller than the Camlin. And so usually you combo this with Mage Sandals so that you can get more of like a surprise pull-in. And you can pull people in and root them, which is like, it's okay. Um, it's kind of nice that you can pull people in and root them with the same weapon. It is a root though, which is unfortunate. It's not a stun like a Grovekeeper. It's also just not really as good as camlening someone and then Grovekeepering them. So, you know, can't use defenses while you're stunned. You can do it while you're rooted. Bedrock Mace, this is for trolling your team. Oathkeepers, uh, it, I don't know, this seems like it tries to do a lot of things. So this puts down a little strip in front of you that anyone, or up to 10 allies that go through it will get shield and move speed. The thing is that you generally don't need a shield on your engage. Like usually you run into the enemy, you use your cooldowns, and then as you're backing up, they try and counter, or you're countering them. Uh, and so isn't very effective for trying to get like an emergency shield out onto people because it's kind of clumsy to use. It's like a line, um, and then the move speed is good for like the engage, but uh, it also only lasts for 5 seconds. I know I'm rambling, but it's just that all the things together aren't terribly effective. Also, the healing on your auto attacks is just going to give healing sickness. It doesn't heal enough to be worth it. Alright, let's move on and try and finish this before I become just a bumbling fool. Which I already am, but you know. Axes, this is like a 1v1 thing. I believe they're reworking it in the next patch, so I'll just leave this out. I still don't think it's going to be ZvZ. I don't think it's going to be a ZvZ option. Great Axe. Great Axe is like a commonly recommended PvE weapon, and people like see this and they read it and they're like, haha, that looks so fun. I can just spin to win inside the enemy and do a bunch of damage. But here's the thing. With focus fire, you're not doing a lot of damage. Second thing, you're gonna get interrupted every time. I should stipulate that they are potentially making this uninterruptible in the next patch, and so maybe it will do damage in the next patch. Maybe. It probably won't be enough damage to make it good, and it's also not a halberd or a realm breaker. It's just damage, and it's like probably won't be a great amount of damage. Maybe if you combine this with like a Spectre jacket, maybe. We'll see. Depends on the numbers. Realmbreaker. This is going to be one of your two go-to options for Axe. So this is the Avalonian weapon, and so like most of the other Avalonian weapons, this thing does a shit ton of damage. It also now reduces your max and current health by 20%, which we talked about with like the Incubus Mace isn't like a terribly big deal, especially because it like goes back after 5 seconds. But it does make it so it looks like you hit harder, and if they die within 5 seconds, it is something. But yeah, it also just does a bunch of damage, and it's pretty easy to hit. The cone is decently large. Okay, it's pretty small, but it's large enough that you can hit like an entire clump. Halberd, this will this swings around you, and it doesn't do a crazy amount of damage. It will do decent damage if you have a fully stacked soldier armor and, they're not focus fire protected, of course. But the nice thing about Halberd is that your Q ability will put like a bleed on people, and your E will spread that bleed around to other people, as well as adding a stack. So especially with the new Caerleon cape, where you can get like a reset on your Q, you can essentially Q to get one stack, Q again to get a second stack instantly because of the cape reset, and then E to spread 3 stacks around to everyone. And so the thing about stacks is that when they're at max stacks of 3, their healing received is reduced by 20%. So I'm typically not the biggest fan of damage over time, as you've probably figured out. But one of the things that's different about melees is that you can stick around after the engage is over. So right, like your team runs in and engages, you do your QQE combo or whatever, get your bleeds, and then you can continue to run further into the enemy because unlike the guys in cloth, you're tanky enough to take a couple of hits, and you also stack up your soldier armor by taking a couple of hits. You're not going to survive and engage or anything, but you won't like instantly die to just ambient damage. And so while you're running deeper into the enemy, they're going to go for their counterattack, but you're just like a single guy at this point in their backline. They're just going to sprint past you because they're looking for the clump. And so then your dots are slightly more effective because you're continuing to do damage after the clump is over. And if you just keep those dots up all the time, it's not gonna like really kill anybody, probably, unless you're already winning and the healers are overtaxed. But you will continue to do damage. I think the E is also, it's only a 15-second cooldown, so you can keep going. You can use your E off cooldown for the rest of your Zerg and continue to like spread around your damage. And then it has the nice bonus effect of reducing their healing done by a little bit, or healing received. So not only are they bleeding, they also receive slightly less healing. It's not going to win you the fight compared to your Zerg's ability to delete clumps, but it can be kind of useful. Putting a little bit of pressure on the healers, like it's not the worst thing in the world, And like I was saying, when you melees have the ability to use soldier armor, and so when this is fully stacked and you get, I think it used to be 100%, now it's 70% damage increase. Yeah. Combo that with like some royal sandal or something, you can get some good damage off. Carrying color, this shoots in a line and reduces healing received. If you wanted healing received, probably just go Damnation in a ZvZ. The E just isn't going to do as much damage as like the Halberd E does, and you're not spreading your dots all over the place. Infernal Scythe, this E it hits twice and inflicts a bleed, so it does some decent damage, but it's not brimstone damage. So like it's kind of in the boat of like Wailing and Weeping, where why would you use this when you could just use better options? But if you get your solo clump and you're wearing like 1700 IP, then you can, wow, look at me, I do so much damage. That kind of thing. Bear Paws is pretty similar. Um, this one, at least the bleed is true damage. It's it's pretty popular with axe players since they get like the mobility jump thing. It's kind of satisfying to use. Um, yeah, but it's just damage, and it's not as much damage as other things. And the E is 30-second cooldown. I think Scythe is too. No, Scythe is only 20 seconds, so there we go. It's just damage. Not even great damage. Realmbreaker and Halberd, those will give you some big oomphs. And be useful to your Zerg. Assuming that you're in a situation where melee is useful. I guess to talk about... I skipped Mace WZ. Let's talk about Axe quick. Basically, you go Raging Blades. This gives you can stack it up like instantly, basically, and it gives you 40% more damage. And it also just does some extra damage. No big deal. Yeah, I think the other ones are not as good for ZvZ. I think most Axe players are still using Rending Spin. It doesn't particularly matter to anyone which one you use. Whichever one you prefer, go for it. It's not like the root is going to be terribly effective. Back to Maces real quick. Snare Charge is your go-to option. It's a decently long root. It's on a fairly low cooldown, and you can kind of use it either as a precursor or as a follow-up to your own like Camlin-y. Having some people on guard rune can also be kind of handy. It's just like a mini Judicator armor, which we'll talk about. You use it basically just like you would Judicator armor, just with a lower cooldown. So yeah, it's not a bad option. For Qs, you always want to go Stake Your Ground. The likelihood that this does something in a ZvZ is not terribly high. But you can put it on top of a clump just to make sure that like as they get unstunned, they have to fully walk out of your puddle. In like castles and territories, you can put it in the sweet spots for DPS and then get some good use out of it there. Alright, lastly we have swords. There aren't really any swords at the moment that are like great ZvZ weapons. They just don't. They're kind of like Bear Paws and Infernal Scythe. All they do is damage, and it's not like a crazy amount. It's an okay amount, don't get me wrong. You can play swords. You can play Bear Paws. You can play Infernal Scythe. You'll do okay damage. But would your shot caller rather you be a Brimstone? Probably. Okay, sword. Broadsword, this is a single target. Claymore is a single target. Kingmaker, this is technically AoE, but the the size of the AoE is just way too small to be useful. If you're trying to hit like 3 people, then it works fine. Maybe. If they all line up for you. But if you're trying to hit like 10 people that got clumped by a Camlin, you just can't hit them all, and it's kind of sad, really. I wish they would fix it, because I'm max swords. And I wish this was good. Dual swords. This is technically an option. It has a jump attached to it that doesn't make you CSC immune, which you do have to worry about getting interrupted, which can be rough. It does 6% of their max health as true damage, so that's kind of handy. But has a 20-second cooldown, and really it ends up doing similar damage to the Clarion Blade. So Clarion Blade, this does a quick AoE around you, no jump attached, and is also one-handed, so you get to use an offhand with it. So usually with that offhand, you end up with doing similar damage to the dual swords. The max health true damage will probably hit a tank harder than you will, but it's something. But this thing does only have a 15-second cooldown. Pair that with an omelet and some CC, like some leather armor, and you get it down to like 12 seconds or 11 seconds or something like that. Carving Sword is a dash. It does a little bit less damage than Clarion Blade and dual swords, but it does pierce. But we have better options for pierces, and there's other swords that do more damage than this, so it's kind of a meh option for ZvZ. Galantine Pair. This thing used to be super good. It's in the Wailing Boat and Weeping category. Got hit by the AoE escalation nerfs and I think some targeted nerfs, and it does damage, but it's just not quite as much as you would want it to be. So if you are a sword player, I would recommend going Clarion Blade. Between its super low cooldown and it's super easy to use, you can kind of run around the back line like you would as like a halberd player and just kind of try and cause havoc. If you can, let's try and sync up with like some other melee players, and you guys can kind of do your own mini claps in the background by yourselves. Usually it's like you kind of scatter, gather up your charges, and you'll kind of meet up, clap, and then scatter again, so that you don't they don't like turn and focus you too hard. For W's, basically going to use Iron Will. This makes you immune to purges, increases your move speed, increases your defensives, and also gives you a heroic charge stack, so you can use it to like keep your stacks going if you're about to drop them, or I think the AoE Q only gives you 2 stacks at a time, so you can Q once, hit like a bunch of people, Iron Will, and then E afterwards. So, yep. Alright, that covers all of the weapons. This video is way too long. We'll see if I even bother editing out some of the chunks. But there we go. Every single weapon.